All right.
Justin, is that hat like a permanent fixture on you?
No, I.
Oh my God, there's hair under there.
Welcome. So Rob just asked me. We're coming into this at 100 miles an hour as everybody drops in. Rob just asked me if my hat is a permanent fixture. No, I do have a receding hairline, but I do have hair. If you go on LinkedIn, I actually made a video, Rob, yesterday, and I don't think I wore my hat. I couldn't find it. Well, I was like, I didn't.
Oh my word! I'm aware. It must have been a dark day for you not to wear that hat. I've got another friend of mine within the industry I respect equally, and he often wears a hat as well. And I think it's just a cultural thing. I don't typically wear a hat, and I don't grow a beard. So there we go.
It is what it is. But Rob, thanks for jumping in. So let me quickly. Most of you guys have been bouncing from presentation to presentation, so you know, but just in case you're jumping in now or came in at the end of the last one, the chat is over here on the right side of the thing. And just while we're going through the housekeeping stuff, drop in chat some stuff that you would love to be trained on because, hey, we have Spider Forensics here, and he'd probably love to know. So what topics do you feel you're weak in and would love to see training on? We'll just do that while I'm going through these housekeeping things. You have chat on the right there, Q&A. You can feel free to drop that in at any time. We'll be running some polls over here as well. You'll see those popped up. Rob will let me know when he wants to pop those up so we can do whatever. And so we have Rob Atto of Spider Forensics. And Rob, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce yourself, Spider, in your presentation. We'll get going.
Thank you, Justin, and thank you to Exterro for extending the invitation for me to join your virtual conference. It truly is an honor to be a part of what you're doing here to share information with the community. And I go back to the time, Justin, when you actually reached out to me and asked if I would do a talk for you. And some of you would be aware, some of you are not aware that typically I would do a technical presentation, and I asked Justin, can I do something just a little bit different? Because over the years, I've learned a lot about what training is, being head of a training organization within our industry, and there's always a lot of questions about how do I decide what training I want to use. And so I asked Justin, could I do something that was a little bit different, that not is quite as technical, but I can't resist. And so at the end of this session, if we get time, we'll talk about a little scenario about choosing your training based on maybe a new set of artifacts you're getting. So a little bit about me and how I know Justin. Justin and I did actually work together in the early days of Exterro's life when it was Access Data. And my Access Data time goes all the way back 20 years. It's frightening that it's actually 20 years this year that I actually did join Access Data as a senior trainer. Back in the day, and I enjoyed my time teaching the Forensic Toolkit and everything that came with it, Forensic Toolkit or FTK1 through to 2, 3, 4, 5, so on and so forth. But I haven't obviously been around in Exterro in the days of the latest versions of FTK. But over the years, I've been involved on training. 2 decades, I've been delivering or managing digital forensics training within our industry, working for the good companies within our industry, Access Data, aka Exterro, Celebrite. I head their international training. I head Nuix training for 2.5 years, built their initial training programs where Angie took it over when I left, and Celebrite is where I am now. Sorry, not Celebrite, one about, I had it on my mind. No, Spider Forensics is where I am right now. And we are a dedicated training organization. And so a question that quite often comes in for us is, how do I choose my training? When we get staff inside, how do we sell our training? What do we do? And so what we do as an organization is we provide tool agnostic training. We absolutely know there is a need for the automated tools. We couldn't do our job without that particular tools in there. But what goes along with the tools is the training. And so what I want to share with you with a few slides and a little scenario is really why workflow-based training is important to you as an examiner, as an investigator, to align with your automated tool usage and how you can incorporate good training with good tool usage. So first of all, I'm a keen advocate of multi-tools, open source tools, advanced processes in doing your analysis of digital forensics. Now, e-discovery, obviously, it's different because the use of using GitHub tools, etc., and open source tools, etc., isn't as prolific as it would be in other types of disciplines within our realm. But certainly in all of our realms, we have to use an automated tool, predominantly to streamline the analysis in order to get through the caseload. Back in the day when I was in law enforcement, dealing with real criminal cases, we actually were dealing with very small data sets in the megabyte size. Now, I'm showing my age here. This gray hair didn't come because I knew Justin here, but through years of working in the field. And so we used to be able to process nearly every sector on a device, but in these days we're dealing with petabytes of data, multi-locations of data, data that's volatile. So we need automated tools to streamline that process. We can't get away from that. So we're not saying we get away from the area there. Data integrity. We need to ensure that our forensic tool organizations like Exterro, OpenText, etc., are keeping their tools up to date for the identification of new files being released, that they can identify these items correctly, categorize them as they should be, and allow you as an examiner and investigator in order to work through what is relevant to the case. Therefore, the automated tools should minimize human errors, overlooking the data, getting tired at it. So we need that automated tools to automate that process as well. And let's not leave out the big data and the amount of data we have to process. Gone are the days when we had just one single hard drive in a desktop machine back in the day. Now we're dealing with multiple devices assigned to every case and every matter. We're dealing with multiple cell devices. We're dealing with multiple tablets. We're dealing with multiple locations, cloud-based data, etc. So using an automated process to collate all this information, deduplicate this, run hash analysis to eliminate files that we can ignore, using hash analysis to identify files that may be contraband is crucial for modern digital forensics. And so as much as I'm a keen advocate for not promoting solely automated processes, I also understand that we have to use them to process a good majority of our cases. So there's absolutely a need for the tools. Now, what are the risks associated with relying on automated tools? And for this, there can be a bias by the developers. I have worked for several software vendors over the years of my time within this industry as an educator, and I have learned over the years that software vendors typically be very biased to their tools. Now, why wouldn't they? For example, if I go to vendor A and look at how they process, for example, a Windows artifact, let's say, for example, it is a key artifact within the registry, we can see that that particular vendor understands that area in depth, and so will relate the specifics that I need to show, say, culpability of my user's activity. Whereas I might go to vendor B, and vendor B focuses more on live data or volatile data, just touching and ebbing on the registry. And so both tools may be key tools within the industry, but because one tool has got more in-depth knowledge about the particular artifact and programming reliance on that to show you the results, it would be that one, that I'm getting skewed results from tool to tool, and two, it may simply be that the tool doesn't understand it, so it's not showing it. And so when it comes to a training perspective, I'm not going to teach that. Okay? Again, I've worked for many organizations throughout the years, And if a particular feature is not supported or a particular artifact is not supported, it's like it doesn't exist. And so be very mindful about the automated tool choices. Does it fit the need for what your work is involved? Okay, contextual gaps. Okay, now again, when I speak to the developers of the software tools, when I speak to the program managers of the software tools, I've had some fairly in-depth conversations to talk about the forensic process. Okay, so for example, talking about, and I'll use a registry as an example, a deep dive into the structure of the registry. I'm very going into that geek level at how the cells and the blocks of information work. Now, for most people, who cares about cells and blocks unless you're really deep diving in there? So the programmers, for example, can get very fixated on what's not relevant or have improper interpretation of the data, interpretation of that. So again, unless the programmer developing the software is not aligned with the digital forensics workflows, with the current trends, etc., you end up with big gaps and larger gaps building up within the actual capabilities of the tool and what is really, really relevant. Okay, so when you're choosing your automated tools and using them and even choosing your training, be very mindful, does it do what it says on the box? Is it there? Is the programmer? And I will say over the years, and I won't say which company it was for, but regularly I would go into the corporate headquarters and do a class very similar to what I used to teach for that software, and do a class to the developers talking about the workflow associated with how the use of the tool is, the forensic relevance. Have been into Microsoft and spoken about the forensic relevance of their operating systems when it comes to law enforcement examinations. Okay, teaching people who are not focused like we are on the artifacts, understanding a bit more about why they do things the way they do and helping them in their cause to build something that is needed by the community. So contextual gaps can be a bit of a challenge, and this is why we spend time on and our SMSs, I guess, to actually support the tools. Interpretation errors. Okay, so there are assumptions built into automated tools to identify, for example, a file that is linked to, say, another Windows or a Mac processor that shows that there was intent or there was certain amount of culpability. Okay, again, I'm not going to bash any particular tool, but there is one tool out there that does make a lot of assumptions based on items that are not related to the artifact or the item in question. It is just assumed that because one piece of information has some hints that it could be part of another piece of information, and that piece of information has a hint that it could be linked to another, there is an assumption within that particular tool that it actually does belong to the same process. Now, does it get it right once, or does it get it right 99.9% of the times? It's fairly accurate under there, but it is a automated process that is designed within the programmatic part of the back end that is making these assumptions under there. So training is where we get over that. Okay? When we look at potential interpretation errors, or where we quiz the software vendors, is how did you come to this assumption? How do you link this artifact with this artifact to show culpability? I need answers, not an algorithm that has been applied. So these are the questions that should be asked, not just from an automated tools perspective, but also from a training perspective, that we go and learn those artifacts. Again, I believe that workflow-based tool agnostic training is a way to say, if artifact A does have a link to artifact B and artifact B has a link to artifact C, then I should be able to repeat that manually without relying on an algorithm. So interpretation errors, we need automated tools, absolutely, to process our data, but we also have to be very mindful that it's us that go on the stand, not the developer of that particular process, that needs to check that or needs to validate their own programmatic functions under there. Okay, so be very mindful of that. Training gets us over that. And then erroneous conclusions, depending on the results, when there's not enough data sets, enough data as an input. Okay, so we all know, or many of us be very aware of, if I put bad data in, I get bad data out. Okay, it is just a common thought. So if, for example, a tool developer is sampling a very small amount of data to make a large conclusion about these are facts, then it does have a knock-on effect. It does have a knock-on effect. And so if we make an over-dependence on what the developer's done for the tools, what the programmer's done the tools without understanding their testing processes, then we start making or introducing increasing risks to our own findings by not validating. And again, training is a way that we go forward with this, understanding that I can take those same artifacts and push them onto another process or another application. So how do you check for a reputable training? How do you make sure that your tool is going to process correctly? Well, first of all, the curriculum process under here. Now, again, over the years, I've worked for many companies and I've spoken at countless conferences on different topics. Okay. I have been, in some respects, chastised by my employer. The one that pays my bills is that not once did I mention the company that I work for or stayed within the boundaries of that particular tool. Okay. What I have done is to provide over the years an unbiased approach without selling the particular product. Okay, so the curriculum that I typically present under here, it needs to be focused. So when I'm looking at key considerations, what is the focus of the curriculum? Okay, is a curriculum broad enough, whether it be from an automated tools provider or an independent provider like Spider Forensics, IASIS, SANS, etc., that it is based on real-world application, not necessarily focusing on the capabilities of the tool or the process, that you work with live data. As an example, and again, not to sell Spider Forensics, but of course I'm going to mention us, is that when we deliver any one of our classes, and we have 15 of them, the data sets are usually collected just before the class, not a year, 2 years, 5 years. And I have seen that in software vendors. You'll go and take a look at their data sets and you'll see that it is years old. Years old. Now, we know that technology moves on so quickly that I can't rely on something that is years old. And so the training has to be focused on real world applications. What are we seeing in today's world? Is it focused on mobile communications, cloud-based applications, or host-based applications? Another part of choosing your training provider, whether it be your forensic tools like FTK, etc., what expertise do they have? Now, I know most of the trainers for most of the major software vendors, great guys. Many come from a law enforcement background or from a background where they are practitioners. Okay, so they have that expertise typically, but it doesn't hurt to do background checks to make sure that they have the experience to follow up. They understand the challenges that are being faced. Again, we always challenge internally and externally whenever we are presenting. For example, we will throw live data out and we will take a look and say, does it fit the mold? Is something wrong with this? And so considering the expertise of the trainer, giving you that credibility, because again, it's a huge investment you're going to work on. The reputation. Okay, so the reputation when you're choosing who's going to deliver your training and put that investment for that return is going to be through your research of that organization. I'll use SANS as an example. We all know SANS has some very great certifications. Okay, we all know that SANS has some great instructors under there. So the reputation is good. Okay, now whenever we look at reputations for any organization, including SANS, we don't necessarily focus on hey, this is fabulous, fabulous. We're looking at the one that says, hey, this particular content seemed to be a little bit out of date. This particular content wasn't relevant to mine. So when you're choosing any of your classes, when you're choosing who's going to deliver your FDKE class, is it coming from the source? Is it going to be one of the evangelists, Exterro, or is it coming from a partner? Be very mindful that you have the choice at who's going to deliver the content. And I do know, again, back in the day, that as an industry standard, most training providers will not put who's going to deliver the class in. Independents do, we do, SANS does, etc. But when you go to many of these other training providers, they won't say who's delivering the class. And there's a particular reason for that. It's because, one, people will gravitate to somebody who has that reputation, and so they won't fill up a class if somebody who doesn't have that. And two, the individual delivering the content may not be necessarily qualified in that particular aspect. Okay, their expertise could be aligned to a different type of discipline, and they're filling in because they know a particular project. So look at the provider's reputation, who's delivering the classes. Okay, and then under here, the hands-on training itself. Training, when you are looking at who you're going to get your providers from, remember there has to be hands-on. There has to be hands-on. How many of you, if I put a poll out there, and I'm not going to because I was speaking about polls before I got in here, but how many of you have been to a class where you have not barely touched the computer on day one? Okay, you've been through either an installation theory. Now, I'm not going to say at Spider Forensics we don't have classes. I just recently delivered a class myself, and day one was almost all theory, but that was the nature of the class. It was designed to be that way, to invoke discussions, but then discussions itself is part of interaction as well. So there should be hands-on. Okay, when you're choosing your training provider, ask the question, how much of the class does actually constitute a hands-on exercise? Is there practical real-world experiences? Can I bring my own data? Obviously, we're going to say no. That would be the worst thing ever, to use someone else's data. Not necessarily because we don't trust our training, but because you don't know what's on there, particularly if it's a criminal case. But certainly, there has to be substantial hands-on to reinforce that knowledge under there. So evaluating the courses for you. Okay, what do we look for? What is your return on your investment? Okay, what do we get under there? So what does it focus on, first of all? Is there any practical skills? Okay, now, again, practical skills. How many certifications do we need in this industry? Okay, it's frightening. Okay, back in the day, okay, I'm showing my age again, there was a Vogon. Many of you wouldn't have heard of them. Certification, there was, or started off the ENCE from NCASE, which is now OpenText, and then the ACE certification came along from Access Data, now Exterro. But we also have the CFCE, and we can go on and on. So what we find within our industry, that there are a lot of courses out there that focus on passing the test. That is all they are done for. They're focusing on the test. The worst offenders, and I hate to say this, are the mobile forensic software vendors. Okay, they are designed to actually get you certified to say that you are competent in using the tool. Okay, but does it actually teach you anything about acquisitions, analysis, workflows when you get a device in, and challenges when you get a phone that won't dump its data? Okay, so is it relevant? The practical skills that you want to take away from there, will it make you applied? Does it mean that when you finish the course on a Friday, that Monday morning you can come in and tackle that case? If it doesn't, then the course has let you down. Your investment has let you down. Not the fact that you can pass a little assessment that was designed by the software vendor, not an accredited university, but the software vendor accredited it, okay, then it doesn't necessarily gain weight as to, did I get the bang for the buck, or was it just a money generating process? So certifications, be very mindful of them. It's a practical skills that I want. I want a way to measure to say that, yes, I was listening, but certainly make sure that when you're choosing your courses, make sure it's aligned to what you need. Case studies. Okay, now case studies are interesting because we, in the past, in the days, we speak about our war stories. And when I first emigrated to the US, I live here now. I lived, grown in England, live in the US in West Virginia now. Is when I worked for NW3C, the National White Collar Crime Center, all we heard were war stories. Okay, you would go out with some very accomplished instructors, and they would run these war stories, and so it was fine until you heard it 1,000 times, and you'd heard it 5-10 years later. Okay, what I need is case studies that are relevant today. Case example. I just recently delivered the UAV forensics course in the UK, and we had some very interesting discussions about cases that are happening today. The aircraft being flown in New Jersey, the aircraft over Los Angeles, the little UAVs that have been flying over there, very similar to this little guy that's in my hand here. Okay, this isn't the one, by the way. But certainly the case studies. Bring a case study in. Does it fit the tool's capability? Is it realistic? Is it that you could take that case study and do the case within the tools or with the processes that are being taught to you? Tool agnostic approach. Okay, now I'm not saying ditch Exterro or ditch FDK. Justin will never invite me again. Okay, and I'm sure that there will be some other challenges as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
No.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So we don't drop our forensic tools. We absolutely need these, but have a variety of tools in your arsenal. I know that if I get a mobile device, I have to throw it into a forensic tool. It's going to go into Celebrite. It's going to go into MSAB. It's going to go to Oxygen. Those are our leading contenders for those types of devices. It doesn't mean that Exterro and OpenText and the others can't process this. It just means that I'm using a tool to get the job done. But I do have to have some weights and measures. Okay, so as an example, a case comes in or an exhibit comes in, and we throw it in our forensic tool, we get a weird result. That's a technical term, a weird result. So I throw in the data in one tool. Let's say, for example, I throw it into X-rays or WinHex, and I see there is a date and time presented to me within the tool, and it doesn't seem to align to the allegation or the case. What do we do then? Okay, where do we go? Okay, now I can say that many times I've seen on the different list serves, like the IASES, International Association of Computer Investigative Specialists, where I've seen them or examiners post a question, hey, I've got this date and time from tool A, and I've got this date and time from tool B, and they're different. Which one's correct? Well, the training should have educated you in order to tackle that problem. Okay, the training should take you down to the hex, or take you at least to show you where you get the data from. Okay, so tool A, tool B gives two different results. Okay, and I can give you lots of examples over the years where that has been pivotal. Then I use a tool that is industry tried. For example, if it's a date and time, I'll use something like Digital Detectives Decode, because that tool there has multiple facets to it, but it is a third-party tool that's free, that is tried and tested within the industry. Which one is correct? So we use a lot of different tools to get the job done. And it's kind of like working on your vehicle or doing some carpentry. Okay, you don't just have one hammer, one nail, or one chisel, or one spanner, or one wrench. You have multiple to get the job done. So use the tools without any bias towards them.
Okay, Rob.
Yeah.
I think you just spoke to it, but I just want to highlight, Angela had a question here. How important is it to use a couple different tools to do the same thing? For an example, finding deleted files, because of the differences in how those tools approach the task. And I think that's what you were just addressing, but just to answer it directly, you would say pretty important.
Thank you there, Justin. And guys, do stop me if you've got a question. Let Justin look, because it's on a different screen. But Angela, you raised a really, really good question there, is the deletion of data. We're actually working with one of the constabularies in the UK doing an assessment of what happens when files get deleted on different types of media, and we're seeing different results. Microsoft is doing different things now. Okay, can't go into the detail now because it's still in research, etc. But it's doing weird things at the physical layer under there. Okay, I'm seeing or learning new things about file systems. For example, I did a class last week, good discussions in class talking about deleted data, and I learned something new, what Microsoft is doing when it deletes files and what it does to directory entries, stuff that didn't change. Okay, so we have to continually evaluate our methodologies. You're right there. I use different tools. If tool A is saying there's no deleted data there, then I go to tool B to see what's there. Tool A and tool B. So I want to validate it's there. I want to validate at the physical location that this data has been located is actually where it's supposed to be. Is it at the same physical sector, or does the tool give me a different enumeration of where it lies within there? So exactly, I'm using multiple tools to evaluate or to get to the data. Now, does this mean that we dual a tool for every case that we work on? Not really, because we don't have that amount of time available to us. But as an example, if I, for example, take Windows 11 and say the second release of Windows 11 and throw it into two automated tools, I'm expecting the same results. Okay, now Microsoft has a fairly aggressive release schedule, not just because of their operating system, but because of their applications as well. So I would make sure that I continue to validate on a known data set what it looks like in, say, version 3. What does it look like in version 4? Okay, our 24H2 release. What does it look like? Are the tools still showing me the data? Are the processes of, say, deleting data, storing information about activities the same? And so multiple tools allows me to get to those results, to validate those. And we use a lot of Exterro's FTK imager in our classes. Why? It's a very simple tool to use. It enumerates the data correctly. Okay, I've never seen it enumerate a sector incorrectly unless the file system is flagged up differently. But that's another discussion for another day. And it enumerates the raw data as I want to see it. So absolutely, Andrew, it's a great question there. I would always check my tools to make sure they are validating correctly. Now, one thing to share with you, we obviously have a lot of classes on the Windows processes, etc. In the UK, in order to be an accredited lab and to use a particular tool for accreditation, the actual lab has to tick off all of the boxes to say that the tool meets those criteria. Well, we have those testers, the evaluators, come to our class because they know that we are a tool agnostic. When we hit the registry, when we hit our application data, when we hit our user interaction data, when we look at that using other tools, they can check off and say, yes, the tool that I'm evaluating is hitting that, or the tool that I'm evaluating completely ignored that or reported something different. So absolutely, I would test the tools continually look at them. I'm not saying daily under there, but I'm saying that regularly take a look at that. Now, from a training perspective, I will tell you that my days at Access Data, going back to the days in Utah, is whenever there was a new release, we would actually throw the Messier image at it or the West Mantooth image at that data to make sure that our lab still worked, that everything worked under there. And so we were actually had a data set we were trying, although very limited back in the day. But then again, things were easier back then anyway. But we ran that against the tool to make sure the results were the same. So absolutely, from a training perspective, from a validation perspective, training gives us that comfort zone, not just to use that particular tool, whether we're using FTK or something else, but it allows me to say, I'm going to throw that data in another hex viewer. I'm going to throw it into another specific tool. Might go to Eric Zimmerman's suite of tools and say, I want to enumerate all of my, say, event logs or my jump lists. Are the results consistent with what I'm seeing inside of my automated tool? So yeah, great question there and very, very relevant. So the next question that I often get that comes into our room is, why at Spider Forensics do you class yourself as a workflow-based training rather than, say, just a digital forensics? Well, I love teaching hex. Don't get me wrong. Okay, I can't think of anything better than being set a challenge to say, let me look at the hex, or let me look at inside of the data at the physical layer. I love looking at that. But realistically speaking, that's for me to validate my own knowledge as an instructor and an expert in certain fields. Okay, but what I need to do is relay that information to say that it's relevant to your case. Okay, so for example, you get a matter in, you get a case in. Okay, and I'll use a mobile as an example, a cell phone as an example. Okay, so let's say, for example, this was my exhibit. Okay, so here's my exhibit that comes in. Okay, now when I joined Celebrate, coming from Celebrate, I came from Nuix, so that was all case review and e-discovery, and prior to that time, it was desktop forensics. So when I got to the world of Celebrate, I knew every bit and byte and how it would work on here, but what I didn't know is, how do I process a device like this? How do I process a device like this? Okay, first of all, I had to deal with the challenge of acquiring the data, but then I had to deal with, where do I start my examination? I'm used to dealing with a Windows examination. Okay, so understanding the forensic processes turned me from fumbling around in a fishing expedition under here to actually being able to focus my attention on what was relevant. Okay, understanding the workflow to get through that. Okay, and we'll talk about that here in just a minute when I talk about, say, a UAV. So the training that you go for, vendor training, tool agnostic training, certification training, it has to ensure that the workflow is in the correct linear stream. Okay, that it does allow the interpretation, interrogation of the data, both as an automation process, but also that you have the ability to interrupt that, to say that, in my example here, this type of artifact, this type of case, I need to tick off these items before I get to the lower part. Kind of like in, say, e-discovery, we deal with the EDRM model. We know how we get to our small data, but it's a workflow that we go through. Okay, and from a digital forensics perspective, that workflow that you learn from the e-discovery world can easily be applied to digital forensics. Okay, making sure that you flow in a logical manner to eliminate the unwanted until you get to the last piece of data. Multi-toolbox approach. Okay, when you take training from your mainstream vendors, okay, which you absolutely need. Okay, absolutely need. If you're getting FDK, if you're getting open text, if you take magnets training, you've got their products, and you have to know how to use it. Okay, I can say that I recently had the pleasure of looking at the Tego's product, didn't know where to begin. Okay, I needed a good 2 hours from their sales engineers to understand their workflow. Okay, but the multi-toolbox approach is absolutely required under there. The trainer should be aware. Okay, I'm not saying that he needs to be an expert in everything. Well, certainly not. There's too many tools out there. Okay, but the trainer should be aware of what are the capabilities. Also, teaching to the limit, not just teaching to the limitations of the tool. Okay, again, I go back in time to the times when I would be a little bit chastised from my own time at some of the software vendors, and I would spend time not just talking about what can be done by the tool, but where I need to think about pulling this out. So, for example, I'll use Windows 11, our Windows 11 class as an example. Now, I could throw Windows 11 artifact into FDK, etc., and it will do a fabulous job at categorizing the data. It will do a fabulous job of putting it in its buckets and doing all the pre-processing that it needs to do. But Windows 11 and Microsoft changed a lot of things in the past 18 months to virtualize a lot of data, to employ a lot of obfuscations of the data and separation of where the data goes. It's no longer as straightforward an examination on Windows as it was. All of our locations are all spread across the profile. So will my tool be able to handle that? The answer is no. Okay, because the programmer of the tool knows that, for example, in that environment, that my recent file activity would have gone in my enter-user.dat file and maybe in a jump list and a link file. Well, on Windows 11, that's not the case anymore. Okay, it goes in lots of different locations and it's separated based on this isolation of data. So in order for me to read that information correctly, I have to pull the data out. So don't limit yourself to a single tool for that particular reason. Okay, using workflow based, okay, I can work through the problem and say, okay, here is where I normally have gone to, say on Windows 10, and I can't go forward. I'm not getting the information, or it looks a bit sparse. It's not all there. Where are the artifacts relating to my Office application? Where are the artifacts relating to my third-party apps? Okay, so this is where I need to say, okay, I know where the artifact is through training. I can export that out and process it in a different tool. And really, that goes back to the early days of Encase, because in Encase, you could right-click and send it out to another process to work with it. Okay? I don't know what it's like today. I haven't been to Encase in a long time, or OpenText. Okay, but you would program it into your tool. You say, okay, I want to take that artifact and I want to push it out to another process to work with it, not ingest it back in, but certainly to give my items. And so multi-toolbox approach along with workflow bases means that I don't hit these roadblocks or I don't ignore them, much like a programmer may not understand the changes that have occurred. And so therefore it is ignored. Okay, efficiency and resource optimization. Your workflows need to work to get to the data correctly. Now, when I went from my Access Data days, Exterro now, to Nuix, it was a big change for me. I dealt with hexes, ones and zeros, looked at Windows artifacts, because back in the day, everything was desktop or mobile was beginning to get fairly strong at that point. Okay, but I was dealing with ones and zeros and a fairly easy approach. Now, if I went over to when I went over to the e-discovery and the review world, I learned that workflows optimize how quickly I can get through that. I learned the EDRM inside out and understand how one tool can be used to cull the data and another tool will be used to do the analysis of the data. Okay, so using that workflow methodology, when I went over to Celebrite, I started to discuss with the training team, can we employ that same idealism? Can we employ the idea that if I work in a workflow based, where I methodically work through, not through a check sheet because they don't work as well, but a workflow to get through that, then I can speed up and refine my processes. Okay, the workflows that you design should be tool agnostic. Okay, because if I rely on the workflow that, say, Exterro's FDK has designed, again, if that tool does not understand a particular artifact, then how would that workflow work? Okay, what I need to do is design a workflow, know what I know from training, etc., and knowledge of testing and validation. And then, obviously, adherence to industry best practices. Okay, when we teach, for example, UAV forensics is one of my favorite topics at the moment, teaching UAV forensics. So when we teach this, globally, there doesn't seem to be a unified approach in how to attack one of these guys under here, simply because of the change in landscape, the different types of criminal uses for them, etc. It would mean that it would be difficult to necessarily set a global best practices without missing some steps. Now, it doesn't mean that I'm going to miss everything. It means what I'm going to say is that I still have to do a collection. Okay, I still have to do my initial assessment. I still have to then look at what is the particular aspects of that type of investigation. We'll get a few minutes of that here in a minute. So the curriculum must adhere to industry standards. Okay, it must adhere to that. If industry standards are, for example, to never switch on the computer to gain access to the data, okay, or to minimize the amount of interaction with a mobile device, that I don't exceed that. And the training needs to make sure that it follows those principles. Thereby, I can repeat them. Okay, that I can hand over my case notes, I can hand over my case so somebody else can repeat those, and it shouldn't miss any particular steps under there. Now, talking of the last slide under here is challenges of artifact relevance. Now, I'm the worst offender for saying, I want to see essay everything on a device. This is just a flying computer. Okay, if I was to genericize it. Okay, so I want to know everything that's in that device. Now, looking at everything within that device, is everything relevant? I've got a Linux operating system in there. I don't care. There's no users doing bad deeds under there. I want to know what the aircraft is doing. Okay, so when you are designing your workflows and when you are deciding on your training, okay, does the artifacts that are being taught are relevant to you? Is the training aligned to what you're seeing, or is it something that is just a core feature that may be a program or was a feature many years ago? So you need to prioritize artifacts of evidential value, and the training should actually do that for you, and so should the tool. Now, when I started building this short presentation under here, I was thinking, where do I go with the AI? Where do I go with AI? AI is that a very annoying new buzzword within our industry. We see it popping up everywhere, this machine learning process. Okay, so got into a very heated discussion about 18 months ago about the reliance on AI within our industry. Now, do we use AI? Okay, do we use AI under here? The answer is yes, it has its place, but don't rely on it. Okay, just like any learning algorithm, any learning child, etc., it only knows what it's been exposed to. Okay, if it's never been exposed to a particular artifact in its life, it will never know. It will never know that it existed, and so we can't rely on it in a particular aspect. I did a test recently when I was designing a new class idea for spider forensics. Is I asked different AI platforms for specific artifacts relating to a particular discipline within our field. I'm not going to spill the beans there what it is. Okay, they all gave practically the same answer, of which 50% of it was completely irrelevant. Okay, irrelevant. It was back in the days of Windows XP and the days of Windows Vista. Okay, it was around in those days because there's lots of documented features on these particular processes that can be scraped out using AI. Okay, whereas I want to build training programs that are relevant and current and workflow based. AI is not going to help me there. It's going to help me with some theory of the way things work. So is AI good for our industry? Well, absolutely it is. It helps us to maybe categorize what a particular case is. For example, back in my days of Nuix, where it had the capability to take a look at a profile and pick out specific keywords to identify, say, what somebody's search history was preferencing. It wasn't AI, but it was close to it. Why not let AI help me to understand what type of case am I dealing with? But it's not going to replace necessarily the ability to do a full-blown examination when vendors like Microsoft and Apple and Android are all designing their operating systems to conceal data, to move it into different areas, to obfuscate it. Okay, Microsoft has Project Helium, big part of our classes, where that is designed to obfuscate data to prevent things like AI algorithms picking it up to steal your data. Okay, You need to use your forensic tools in order to process the data, but there will always be you at the other end to validate what it's doing for you. When we look, for example, and categorize what the tools present back to us in its buckets, I can look at something and say, oh, there's a header that I'm familiar with. It shouldn't be categorized as, say, unknown. It is, for example, maybe a flight log, etc. So remember, you need to validate your findings. Okay, and then lastly, from identification, look at patterns. One thing that I found is probably the easiest part of me as a researcher, as a courseware developer, and an evangelist, if you like, within this industry, is that I have the uncanny ability to look at patterns of data. Okay, look at things that follow those strings and patterns within an item. So, as an example, I've used the UAV as an example here. When I look at the flight logs, they are encrypted. Okay, but give me enough data and look at enough hex, I can identify what is the header and where the encryption string begins, and then apply known algorithms to actually decrypt the logs, which might seem a little bit hit and miss. But look at enough data, you'll see the patterns and start looking at how it's relevant to you. So trained examiners should be taught how to recognize those patterns, recognize those trends, and apply them to the tools. And training has to be in there. With the training itself, it has to be new. If you are going and choosing to spend good company money, public money on training, be very mindful. Ask the question, when was the course last updated? Okay, when is the data sets we're using, when was it created? Those are the questions that should be asked. If the data sets are a year old, if the training wasn't updated for a year, or there was only minor updates, for example, a copyright done, then how relevant is that? So always be mindful of that. Okay, lastly, under here, maintaining examiner expertise through tool agnostic training, collaboration. Okay, so build a relationship with all your training providers. Okay, if you're getting trained from Exterro, you're getting the training from SANS, getting the training from Spider, IASIS, whoever it is. We, training providers, software vendors, will listen to our customers. Okay, if you say, hey, Rob, hey, Justin, your training sucks, it's not relevant, then the next question is, can you tell me why? Where should we be going? What is irrelevant bias? And so we want to share knowledge with you. We want to make better tools, better training. So it's a shared responsibility. Okay, not saying that you've got to do the work, although if you want to come design a class for me, feel free. Could do with the help. Okay, but certainly it's a partnership under there. I like evaluations being honest. Okay, if I get an evaluation that says, hey, Rob, great class, but it's not relevant to what I do on a day-to-day basis, and the first question is, do you do, for example, UAV examinations if it's a UAV class? No, I don't. Are you going to get them in? No, I won't. Then why did you come to class? There probably was a better one for you. Continuous learning. Okay, ongoing learning. Angela asked a question there about should we validate? Absolutely, that's part of the learning process. Okay, developers want to know what's changing. If a developer designs, for example, a process to say, let's say jump lists on Windows 11, Windows 11 jump lists are different from Windows 10 subtly. Okay, but they are different nonetheless. But if the developer of that isn't aware of that, then it means that it won't, or the automated process isn't working. So feedback on both sides, okay, and knowledge shares. And finally, thinking, prioritize the development, prioritize what you need to learn. When you get a new mobile device out, how is that storing its data? How is it protecting the data? If you're doing with e-discovery matter, what are the cloud-based challenges that you're faced now? Or if you're dealing with a digital forensics examination, what has Microsoft or Apple or even Android or Linux-based systems, what are they doing to the data today? Okay, so prioritize the development in your team. Okay, you would have the experts in those particular fields that would be very versed in certain artifacts, and get your teams to do internal training. Okay. We get a lot of people and say, hey, Rob, I'm the internal trainer. Do you mind me taking or asking extra notes? Absolutely. Just don't steal our material. Okay. But internal training helps as well. Okay. Assign somebody a task of saying, hey, I need you to be the event log guy, but I don't know anything about it. Well, now's your opportunity. Okay. Get someone to do those. We rely on the vendors, Sand, Spider, Exterro, etc., to put up a white paper, to put up webinars, but we can do that internally as well. So get actively involved on that as well. And it helps to with the automated processes, but also with the learning as well. So that is the end of my session. I think I'm bang on the mark there as well. So I've got 5 minutes for any questions that may come up there.
Yeah. And then it's up to you. So do you want me to pop up your 2 poll questions?
Yeah, just try out the first one there.
Okay. And so the first one is, when selecting a training provider for DFIR, which factor do you prioritize most? So that should be up right there. And then while people are answering that, Rob, I just want to thank you again, because I'm going to hard cut this in about 3 minutes.
That's fine. That's fine.
Yeah, but one thing that I wanted to it was earlier in your presentation, but it was kind of a quote I made up for you to sum up a slide. It was basically like, utilize the software because you have to, but be skeptical. That was my sum up of a section. And I think, even obviously we provide software, but as a former practitioner, and like you said, a trainer, you've got to know how stuff works, and so that you can overcome those biases that you talked about. I loved it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is, at the end of the day. We use a lot of tools in Spider Forensics, depending on what the class is. Open source tool, paid tools, etc. We use all of them. Couldn't do a UAV examination without specialized tools. Okay, it's impossible, but there are open source tools as well. So we're massively skeptical. Now, there are 2 main vendors in this particular arena. We look at both of them, and we share when things aren't right. We don't bash anybody. We don't say someone else is wrong. That's not our job. Our job is to be skeptical, to test and validate, and we give good feedback. So overall, the community does. So that's a great way to put it there, Justin. Absolutely. I see there was a question there from, looks like Shauna. Some tips on how to break into the DFR field would be great. So breaking into the DFR field is tough. There's a lot of competition that comes out, particularly at the end of the year when you get a lot of university grads coming out. The way to break into this is to, 1, papers. Get yourself known. Okay. Always promote yourself, promote your knowledge, and you put your credentials on your sleeve. Okay, push it out there. Understand that if you've got something to say, some research to share, and it benefits the community, people will hear you, because when you're breaking into this field, you're going to be Googled, like we Google everything. Your background is going to be checked. Get on LinkedIn, etc. But get in there and get known. When you see talks like Exterro has, if there's an opportunity to share a paper, bring that in. Okay, at Spider Forensics, we encourage people to work with us to put the papers on our website and share it out the community. That is the best way to break into this field and get into a lab. And even apprenticeships in the correct labs, they're trying you out. Try before you buy. It's easy to hire, difficult to fire. So get in there, show your work. That is the best way to get into this field. Not necessarily spending thousands and thousands of dollars getting some certifications that don't have any real world application. Get in there with practical skills.
Absolutely. Hey, Rob, I got to cut you because we got to jump him to the next session. But hey, Rob is on LinkedIn. Spider Forensics, of course, on here. So be sure to reach out if you still have questions or want to chat with Rob. Rob, thanks again. And,
thank you. I thank you, guys. The next one, I'll do something technical. I'll get with the team. I'll do something at a technical aspect, see a different side of this as well. But thank you very much, everybody, for your time. I truly, truly appreciate it.
Thank you.